Hello and welcome to the second day of the Winter Ag Workshop. Today we will be learning about building outdoor learning opportunities, school gardens. So first we have some housekeeping. First, in the chat box, there is a link to a pretest. If you have not taken that, please do so. It really helps us. Your video and audio will be off for the rest of the session, but there is a chat box. If you need to say anything, please make sure the little drop down says all panelists and attendees. That lets everyone see it. There's also a Q&A, so throughout the session, we'll ask some questions. You can drop them in there. So finally, everything is visible. It is being recorded, so please be polite about everything. With that, let's welcome Diane Velozo to learn about school gardens.
Okay, we'll try this again. Good afternoon, early evening. As Cassidy said, my name is Diane Velozo. I've been a classroom teacher for 33 years, currently retired and working for the Farm Bureau. So I wanted to talk to you today about my experiences with school gardens over the last 30 years. It's been a real passion of mine, but it's been trial and error. Let me just stop a minute. Are we okay? We're good? Okay. So I wanted to just talk to you a little bit about things that I've learned and maybe kind of simplify the process a little bit for you. Again, this is just something I've done through my experiences as a classroom teacher. It was something I got interested in 30 some years ago when I worked in the Harrisburg City Schools. So we're going to just move forward. I'm going to talk to you a little bit. Can't see if we have slides to go. There we go. So as I said, just a little bit about myself. I have been a classroom teacher. I was also, I ran grant programs. I did green schools when I was teaching in Maryland with Chesapeake Connections. I also worked, you're going to see some pictures from a program I did there with the Goshen Farm Preservation Society. Give them a little shout out. It's a 1783 working farm that was adjacent to our school, so it was just lucky. I'm also currently serving on the executive board of Pine Grove Furnace State Park, which is a beautiful state park right near us, and I help them do volunteer activities, so helping coordinate volunteers and environmental activities. And I do have some experience as a grant writer. So I'll talk to you a little bit about that when we go into our funding. All right, we're gonna move on. Today, I really just want to talk to you about just starting from the beginning, the creation, the planning, implementing, and maintaining a schoolyard garden project. There's a lot of different pieces that go into it, but I don't want anybody to be intimidated. As I said, this was all new to me when I first started, and it's been trial and error all these years. And just there's a lot of information on the internet, so I'm hoping I can simplify things a little bit for you today. But there are lots of resources on the internet, and you'll see that on our resource page, which I believe will be on by tomorrow. And we're just going to determine the elements of a school garden. So I want to just share a couple pictures of my school garden. This was just some of the things you can use. It doesn't have to be expensive to do a school garden. And we are going to talk about that at length when we talk about funding and grant writing and different projects. But I just want you to see some of the, just little things you can do. These are just plain old bamboo poles. We actually took them from somebody's, one of our parents had a little bamboo forest. And so it's things like that you can get for free. These are my actual students. This was our community garden that was adjacent to our school, and we had our own plot. So this was just our very first initial days when we were getting our ground ready. Our little kids starting to plant. And this kind of gives you the scope of the garden. There was actually 57 garden plots up there, and I'll talk a little bit more about that later. But I just want to share a little quick video with you just to get you going on the topic, and then I'll meet you in a minute. Okay. Share screen. Okay. So I really like that video. It's going to be on the resource page. I thought it was a really nice, it's a quick introduction that you might want to use with your staff even, because it really gives a nice overview. School garden obviously is not just about gardening. There's a lot of other things that can go into it. And just, it's just a treasure load of things you can do with a school garden. So the first thing I wanted to talk about when you're building a school garden, the very first step is administration. You can't do anything without the support of your administrators. You don't need to go in with your full plan, but you need to have some things in place. So what I usually advise people to do is when you go into your administrator, you want to ask them about doing a staff survey. You want to get some things down pat about your staff. It's ideal to have 100% staff support, but as many of you know, if you are teachers, it's hard to get 100% on anything. But you really want to get an idea if your teachers are on board with this, because the only way this project or program will work is if you have good staff support, people that are willing to step up and take the lead on some committees we're going to be talking about. It can't be done with one person. It would be really a difficult project for one person to do. So when you go into your administrator, you should really be talking about kind of what your basic ideas are about. Maybe you've already thought about a location, and you've maybe already thought about some ways you can get funding. And we're going to talk about that at length, but these are just when that initial meeting with your administrator is really just to get permission to even start the project and then to survey your staff. So when we go in and talk about surveying a staff, you want to know, number one, is anybody interested? Do they even want to do this? Do they see the benefits of it? Is anybody willing to take the lead in some areas? You're going to need people that are working on the actual design of the garden, choosing the plants in the garden, doing the soil testing in the garden. You want to talk to people about maintaining the garden. You know, and it's not just, you know, you go in and you plant all these plants and then that's just the beginning. You really need to talk about maintaining the garden through the school year and during the breaks when you aren't in school. So we're going to go into that in a little detail too. But you want to talk about, you know, what is the interest level to the students? What kind of academic areas can you bring in? And I will tell you, you can bring every academic subject into this. You can bring all your cultural arts into this. As you saw a little bit in that video, there's certainly lots to do with art and music, and it's certainly physical activity that brings in your PE teachers too. So everybody on your staff can be involved in this project. So informally, again, back to the survey, then you're going to go back to your administrator with a little bit more detail. You've kind of got an idea now of where your staff is, and this is where you're really going to sell it to your administrator if they need to be sold. Some people are really on board with this, but I know in my experiences, sometimes you really have to sell the project itself. I'm anticipating that since you're on this workshop today that you are definitely excited about doing some school garden projects, but you're going to have to sell it, and you're going to have to sell it to your teachers too, because it does take some extra work, but I will tell you the benefits are just boundless. There's no way to even articulate all the benefits you can get out of a program like this. Kids that, you know, don't even want to garden, there's tons of other things for them to do. So when you go in to your administrator, you want to have kind of a basic idea of, as I said, your location. And that's going to include things like, do you have a water source? Do you have sunlight exposure? Do you have shade access if you're going to do those kinds of plantings? Do you need to do a soil test, or are you going to be using raised beds? So these are all things that's why it's important to get different teachers on board that maybe are willing to lead up some of these committees. You're going to want somebody that really wants to do like the garden design. You're going to find people that really are into choosing the plants and picking the design of the garden, picking the location of the garden. Is it accessible to all students, including any students with special needs? So you want to make sure that they also have access to your garden. And you want to go into your principal with all that information. So once you've gotten approval for that, the next step is you really want to be, let's see if I get this advance. Give me 1 minute. There we go. So you're going to, this is basically what I just talked about. You're going to be talking about with your administration what your proposed garden plan is. Doesn't have to be all fancy like this girl up here with her slideshow and everything. But as I said, the video I used in the beginning, I thought was a real nice introduction. These are just some of the things you want to look at. Water sources, sunlight, whether you're going to be doing a raised bed or going right in the ground. You could do soil testing, and I have links to do that. It's very easy to get soil tests. Goes right through the USDA. Or you can even go to your local hardware store. They're about $20. It's very important that you know what kind of soil you're planting in. If you find that your soil is not really going to be good for growing, that's where the raised beds might become involved. And I'll talk about that a little bit later too. So I just have some slides of different gardens I've worked in and different types of things you can do, different types of plants you can use. So when you go in, you're going to be looking, as I said, water source. Do you have exposure to sunlight? What is the growth potential? What do you have seasons of the year where you can have a lot of growth? Obviously, summer is the best time for planting and harvesting, and we're not usually there in the summertime. So we'll talk about what you need to do to maintain that kind of schedule. But there are lots of things that you can plant during the school year and harvest before school is out. Things like lettuces and herbs and even tomatoes. We've grown tomatoes into June. Strawberries are always popular. So there are a lot of things that you can grow during the school year. So don't let that, keep you from not having a garden just because you're thinking you don't have a great growing season. As I said, after you do the soil testing and decide what kind of garden, you might want to do some of the ideas. My very first garden we did was a pizza wheel. And we basically grew things that we would be putting in our pizzas. And then, our culminating event was making pizzas for the school. But you can start really simple. I would say, don't get overwhelmed. Don't try and do this great big giant project from day one, because the best part about school gardens is they grow every year. So every year you can add something new to your garden, or you can try something, we, for example, in our garden, we went from just doing gardening to learning about composting. We had a bog in our garden. We had an apiary, which is very important to flowers. We had a slave heirloom garden, which fit with the theme of our farmhouse that was there from 1783. We had an actual orchard. These were not things we did all at once. Every year we added something new. So that's kind of the beauty of the school garden project, is you can start out really small, get your feet wet, get your hands dirty, and then it expands and you go on. So back to selecting a garden, the kind of garden you want to grow. That's very important. And it's going to be dependent on your location. It's going to be where you can find, make sure you have that water source, that you're not maybe lugging water to it. We actually built a French drain in our garden project. That was one of the things that we did, to make sure we had a water source at all times. Make sure that, again, it's accessible to all students. That's going to be really important. Then you want to actually, again, you can incorporate your art teachers in on this, or anybody that maybe has some artistic design. You want to design your garden. You want to really have an idea of how big it's going to be, the location again, and then you can go right out to the USDA site, which I recommend. And it's on our resource page, and it gives you your hardiness zones. It's going to tell you exactly the kind of plants that can grow in your region and exactly when to grow them. I can't emphasize enough, it's a fabulous resource, and you don't need to go researching all over the place. I think one of the things we run into, teachers are very busy. As I said, I've been a teacher for 33 years. I know how limited your time is. So you want to use your time as wisely as possible. So use those resources to design your garden and decide exactly what you're going to plant and when you're going to plant it. You want to create an actual map. You want to create a schedule for planting. These are some examples of the raised beds. This is not my garden. We did not use raised beds in our garden because our soil was okay, but raised beds are really easy to build. Again, this is where I'm going to be talking about volunteers in a little bit. You don't have to be intimidated by, oh my gosh, I don't know how to build those kinds of things, and the kits are kind of expensive. No, you can get, old boards from somebody's backyard, somebody that's, has some recycled wood to use, and you can use those raised beds if your soil isn't great. The soil testing will tell you exactly what your soil needs and what you need to add, whether it's nitrogen or potassium. So after you select your garden site, after you decide this is the kind of garden I'm going to grow, whether it's a pizza wheel garden, whether it's going to be an herb garden. My very first garden with my kids was a monarch garden because that was one of our science projects. So we did 5 different kinds of milkweed, and then we did other pollinators, and that was our very first garden. We just did a pollinator garden, basically, with an emphasis on monarchs. So we had the milkweed. So back to what we're talking about. This just kind of gives you a little overview of what I just talked about. You want to have your garden design, the size, how you're going to use the space, and then you need that growing schedule, that maintenance schedule. This can be, you know, one class can adopt the garden for a week at a time, or a grade level can adopt it for a month, and they're responsible for all the weeding, any harvesting that needs to be done. And you also want to talk about volunteers. Volunteers are, you know, to me, they were very integral in getting the garden going because they were able to, you know, when you've got a whole classroom out there, you want to make sure kids are doing meaningful activities. And it's hard to be in one place at one time, especially in a garden zone. So volunteers are really a big part of the process. Down at the bottom, you can see where I talked about the USDA plant hardiness zone. Again, it's a reliable resource, and it'll help you get through the deciding what to plant. So that sounds like, oh, wow, I've got my garden and that's it. No, there's a whole lot more to go. So again, you want to make sure your students are involved in every phase of this. One of the things I did in the beginning years, again, I was trial and error. I just tried all different things. I built 2 greenhouses on our school property. It was an inner city school where kids had no access to good land space. So I thought, all right, let's just build some greenhouses. And it really wasn't hard. It was a wooden frame with 9-gauge plastic. I got a lot of the materials donated. I got the labor donated by a local company. And they came in and built these 2 greenhouses for us. So during the winter time, I just got some baby pools, filled them with dirt. And we actually had kids just come in. We planted about 1,500 plants during the winter and kept them going. And then we put them in our greenhouse where we did have a fan system and a heat system and an irrigation system. So this goes back to, this is just a slide that I thought would be helpful if you're deciding that your soil isn't really good. This just gives you a quick overview of raised beds versus in-ground. Both have advantages, both have some disadvantages. It really depends on the location that you have chosen. So this is just I think just a helpful slide that gives you some information. And it is, you know, I think one of the key points, it is improved access for gardeners with disabilities. You might decide to have, you know, a regular garden in the ground, and then you could have some raised beds on the other side of the school if you have an area that, you know, want to expand a little bit that you thought, oh, the soil's not there really great here. So you don't have to have your garden all in one spot either. So I want to talk about that. As I said, volunteers are a key part of your program if you can get them. I know with COVID, the protocols are very different right now, but hopefully by the time you start these projects again, maybe in 2021 and 2022, things have been opened up a little bit more. We can get our volunteers in there, but don't let that stop you if you don't have volunteers. It's just helpful. As I said, I used to when I would take my kids up to the farm, we would do rotations. So it's always helpful to have extra hands up there. And, you know, just to facilitate things. Some of the volunteers you might want to think about are master gardeners in the area. You know, it's the big thing now is local, and I've always been a proponent of local. The big box stores are great, places like Lowe's and Home Depot. Certainly you get some of your materials, but try those local nurseries. They're really usually very enthusiastic about supporting school garden programs because it gets their business going too. You can even tell them, you could give them a little sign, you know, in the garden that something was provided by them. But your local nurseries and your local garden stores are really a beneficial resource. And they might even be able to hook you up with master gardeners. And there's local garden clubs. My local garden club gave us a grant for $300. I didn't even know about it. It was just, you know, as I said, sometimes things are just serendipity, just kind of falls in your lap. I always talk about, you know, you plant the seed and it keeps on growing. So pardon the pun, but you'll find that once you get a project going, people tend to want to get involved with it. So use those volunteers from your local garden clubs, use the volunteers from, you know, don't have to be just parents that are at the school. And again, it depends on what your volunteer protocol is at your school. They can be used not just for the rotations I talked about, but when you are starting out your installation project, you might want to have some volunteers in on that. And then later on, when you go out of your growing schedule, when you're, end of the school year, all of a sudden everybody's gone, you need to have a schedule for the summer. You need to have, one of my resources was the Girl Scouts and Boy Scouts. They would take a week at a time over the summer. I would come down and monitor, but they would still be the main people in the garden. And since we weren't really growing stuff for schools, you could also give them access to growing their own plants in the garden. And a lot of people, if they don't have usable space in their own yard, they might be looking for a free spot to grow some vegetables over the summer. So that's just another option. I guess we can look, do we have any questions that we might want to address?
We don't right now.
Okay, good.
Feel free to drop them in the chat box.
Hope I'm not talking too fast. So I wanted to talk a little bit more about funding and your budget and maybe even some grant writing. Again, don't be intimidated. I went into grant writing 30 some years ago, just filling out the paperwork. It wasn't anything I knew anything about, and you learn as you go, or learn as you grow, as we say. But the funding can come from a lot of different areas. Certainly look into your PTO. PTO has always been kind of my chief people to go to. They were always very supportive in any school I was in. It's a great project. I think they like that it's hands-on. They like seeing their kids do hands-on things. So your PTO is probably your first stop. Most schools have STEM programs now, and there is a budget for STEM. This absolutely fits into STEM. There's so many different projects you can do that relate. We were a green school when I was teaching in Annapolis, and there's so many different projects that go into STEM. So that shouldn't be an issue, and you might be able to procure some of that money. I also talk about looking at, again, I talked about going to your local nurseries. Home Depot and Lowe's, I'll just use them as examples. They do have garden programs that they offer grants for. The problem with that is the time. It sometimes it's a very long process. So you can be proactive and apply ahead of time, but I will tell you, when you're applying for any kind of funding or grants, they are going to want to know what your budget is. You can't just go in and say, hey, I'm going to start a school garden, I need $500. They really want it outlined, especially when you're doing grant writing. They want to know, and again, don't be intimidated by it. It's just questions. But they really want to know, that's where your garden design comes in. That's where your the plants that you've decided to grow. So you really will have an idea of how much it is going to take some legwork. Maybe, again, another committee can go out and do the actual legwork of going out and pricing these plants. You're going to need tools. You're going to need garden gloves for a class. That was another grant that I got. I just had our garden club. They donated 2 sets of 30 each of garden gloves for our little kids and for our bigger kids. That way we had something hands ready to go when they got in there. I would take like a little milk crate and fill it with my trowels, my weeding tools, the garden gloves for a class. As we moved on in the program over the years, we started implementing the lesson plans and putting them right in the crate so the teachers could just come in, pick up a milk crate, and they were ready to go up to the garden. It had everything in there that they needed. Let's see, back to funding and budget. So we did do a couple fundraisers. Successful, yes, but again, that's another time thing. So it kind of depends on how many teachers that you have on board with this. Do you have teachers that will just focus on the funding part of your school project? They're the ones that are going to reach out to your community business partners. They're the ones that are going to maybe go into the stores themselves and get the budget items. Hey, we need $200, and this is why we're going to plant these plants. We're going to start some from seed. We're going to start some right from the plant itself. So have an idea of what kind of money you need if you are going to go into grant writing. Sometimes you can just go to these garden stores and say, hey, are you willing to donate, 30 plants or 50 plants or even more? A lot of times, I know with our local nurseries, I was able to actually get their master gardeners to come in and talk to different groups of children and join us in the garden. I did have a couple other things with the business partner. Yesterday, if some of you were able to join Kelsey from the PA Farm Food Network, the Food Trust, basically. She did talk about they have grants available. And it sounds like it's a pretty easy process and they'll help you. I mean, the best thing about a lot of these agencies, they will walk you through it. There are people there that is their job to help walk you through the grant writing process. So don't be intimidated by it. I always used to say, all they can do is say no, and knock wood, I've never had anybody say no. So look in those, government programs too, because they're a good source and they're not hard at all to fill out the grant applications. And again, as I said, there's people there that will help you. I actually got a grant from the Department of Environmental Protection, which definitely is connected to farms and everything, but you wouldn't necessarily think it was one of your key people to go to. And we actually got a $10,000 grant from them. And it wasn't difficult at all. I had outlined my project. They, again, usually should have an idea of what your garden design is and what your budget is going to be. Back to budget, you want to make sure that you are including not just the plants, but the soil. If you need a soil test, if you're going to need to put nutrients into the soil, if you're going to need garden gloves, which you will need. A lot of the other things, I always like to use recycled products. I have a couple pictures of some things that we used to just make your budget a little bit less. You don't want to be spending money where you don't need to spend money. Find somebody that has bamboo growing in your yard. Get those bamboo poles that you can do for your, stringing your peas and any vine-like plants. Find how kids bring in the old milk jugs. I'll show you a picture of that in a little bit. You can start with milk jug gardens. Big soda bottles can be used as container gardens. So if you are in a place where you don't think you're going to be able to even make a raised bed or the soil's just not great, you can do a lot of container gardening, and that's just as viable as anything you come out of the ground. You want to make sure you have a place to store all these things in the meantime. We actually were fortunate that we had a garden shed right there. But if you don't have a garden shed, maybe there's an old storeroom at school, an old closet at school. You do want to have like a central location. I think it's just for the teachers to access easily. You want to make this easy for them. If you want teachers to be on board, as we all know as teachers, you need to make the process something that they can use easily, and they're not, and maybe your teachers that aren't so on board, if you make it easier for them, that they can just go pick up as I said, we used milk crates. I put lesson plans right in the milk crates with them. There was milk crates that had all the tools and the gloves that they would need. And they could just pick it up and walk out to the garden with it. So that's, just a little easy tidbit. Back to the grant writing again, there are some resources that'll be on my resource page that you can look into. But, really, if you type in school garden grants, you're going to see just thousands of them pop up on the internet. I'm not reinventing the wheel here. I'm just kind of sharing the experiences I've had over the years. And just my advice is always don't be intimidated by it, because there are people there that can help you. Don't feel free to reach out to them. And then when you go to your local places, your local nurseries and your local stores, even your hardware stores, they're not probably going to require as much information, but you do want to make sure you have your garden design and your budget available. They really won't need anything else beyond that. Okay, so we were at the point now. These are just some other things I wanted to show you. Some things you can use: recycled tires, recycled bricks. Find out people like that are, I'm kind of like the pack rat. I'm always looking at when I see a construction zone, I'm always thinking, oh, what can I use in that zone? When they tear down buildings in cities, they're always looking for a place to put the bricks, and usually it's free to whoever will come and haul it away. So just keep your eyes open for things that you see here and there. This is another project we did. As I said, we didn't start everything all at once. We started out with a small monarch garden. Excuse me. But one of our projects we did, which did require some fundraising, we purchased a high tunnel because we really did want, we felt like we were losing a lot of the school year, for planting and things. So I coupled with our local high school program, excuse me again, and they had an environmental class and an environmental club. So we wanted to get them involved. Those high school kids were great mentors for our kids at the elementary level. So that was one benefit, but they also were involved. This is a STEM activity. They built a hydroponic garden. So we brought it into the high tunnel, and we were able to grow. We chose to do lettuces over the winter months, and kind of the same thing. We wanted to make sure that there was classrooms that were involved in just tending to the garden, even in the middle of winter. And when we harvested them, we were able to donate them to the food bank. So we did that the 5 years that before I left, we did that for the last 5 years I was there. Again, I'll be talking about benefits of school gardens near the end. And this certainly is a benefit. You know, I think now more than ever, kids have become aware of the food poverty in our country right now. It maybe has even affected them personally. So these are kind of the projects that really, you know, boost your community and really talk about empathy and kindness to your neighbors and helping out your neighbors. So I'll talk a little bit more about benefits as we go on. So once you get to the point where, it's just another shot of our high tunnel. And this was just the actual farm where my school project was. So I put this slide up so you can refer to this after I leave, kind of just going through everything that I've talked about. You need to go to your administrators. Make sure that they are on board with this. Make sure that they're going to allow teachers access to the garden, that it can be used in science, in math, in reading, in history. Every academic area can be touched in the school garden, and there's lots of different ideas for projects. You know, down to the little ones, we did shapes in nature and measuring, all the way up to the older kids that were creating, you know, they created the bog project, and they talk about biomes and different living systems. So there's certainly a plethora of activities you can do in every subject area, and you'll find some ideas on my resource sheet. As I said, we went into designing the garden, identifying the needs and obtaining the resources. That's what I talked about when I said, you know, going out and making sure that your soil is appropriate, making sure that you have proper sunlight, proper water sources, accessibility for all students. Then you go into your funding. I kind of look at my volunteers a little bit ahead of time, because I want to make sure that if we can have volunteers, your volunteers can also be your source of a lot of things like funding and master gardeners. So I kind of look at my volunteers a little earlier in the process. Just to give you a little side note, when I was teaching in the Annapolis school systems, I happened to, this one year, I had people in my classroom, parents of students in my classroom. One worked for the Secretary of Agriculture for the state of Maryland. So yes, I had him come in and talk to the students. He was the Secretary of Agriculture, but he also had a farm where he planted 4 million seeds, which always impresses kids when you say that, every year. So, and I had several people in this particular class that year that their families were involved in agriculture or engineering, or we had some master gardeners. So your parents can be your best resource in many ways. And so not just to come in and work in the garden with you. Some people don't want to do that, but they can use their resources in other ways. And just reaching out and saying, hey, I know somebody that, you know, has some extra lumber, and maybe we could use that to do our raised beds. Or just, you know, don't be afraid to reach out to, we actually did a little school survey that we sent out to our whole school. I think it had maybe 4 or 5 questions on it. It wasn't anything lengthy. The parents did it like a Survey Monkey online. Just what do you have maybe that could contribute to our school garden? Do you have resources? Do you have availability? Do you have any money you want to donate? Do you have materials you can procure or donate? So reach out to those parents in your building first and foremost. And then that grows too. I had a whole grandparent program. So a group of grandparents would come in and work with the kids. So that's, you know, the volunteers, I think as you can tell, I'm very big on volunteers. Again, designing your garden program for all, that goes back to your accessibility. Children with special needs tend to just flourish in school garden projects, because there's a lot of problem solving. There's a lot of, you know, you have to be flexible. You have to show that, you know, you're thinking outside the box. So a lot of times these are the kids that really flourish in your program. Connecting the garden to the classroom. We're going to talk about that a little bit more when I talk about the benefits at the end. Then we're going to go into, and I'm going to switch out of here, the actual installation. This was our monarch garden. The actual installation of the garden. And that's where you are going to really set up your schedule and your timeline, because it's not just about, you know, putting the garden in the ground and then, okay, we're done, wash off our hands and we can leave. You've really got to set up a schedule for the whole year. Even if you're not in session the whole year, which most schools are not, you still have to do a whole schedule for the whole year. Talk about, are you going to do any winter planning? That might be something that's done down the line, 2 or 3 years down the line. As I said, we didn't buy our high tunnel until I think probably our 5th year, when we had done some fundraising and kind of had gotten our hands dirty a little bit and figured out what we wanted to do with our garden project. And we wanted to get the high school kids involved. So that's where the hydroponics came in and the high tunnel idea came in. So it's constantly growing, pardon the pun. Your spring is obviously a huge time to do your planting, but it piggybacks on what you've planted in the classrooms in the winter. You know, don't be afraid to, you know, have your teachers sign up to each grade level can do a different vegetable to start from seed. And there's just a plethora of activities that could go with that too. Then you go into your summer schedule, and that's really kind of the one where you're really relying on your volunteer groups. But as I said, we set it up. It's kind of like a, it's kind of like the schedule we used when we did party planning at school, to be honest with you. So it's something that teachers are familiar with, and you go on and we just set it up week by week, and different families, different groups. As I said, Girl Scouts and Boy Scouts did it for a while. And we had some other groups in the area, some different clubs in the area, and they just signed up for the weeks that they were able to do the gardening. And it basically meant that they needed to water when needed, and weed when needed. And they were also available, you know, they were also free to use the space, and start some of the things on their own that they wanted to grow, because most schools are usually out anywhere from 6 to 8 to 12 weeks. It kind of depends on what part of the country you're in. So the summer schedule is pretty important, because you want to make sure that garden stays maintained, even if it's not things that you're actually growing yourselves as a school project. You don't want it to just, you know, sit there and become just giant weed pile. And the weeding, as any of you know that garden, is critical in the summertime. And then, of course, when we come back in the fall, we're fortunate that most schools come back pretty early, really near the end of summer. So we were still able to do a lot of growing. Some of it we started with the volunteers in the summertime, getting some pumpkins out and some watermelons. But it's obviously something that could go into the fall, so the kids have a taste of the gardening right from the start of school. So the installation and the timeline and all that growing schedule is year round. You want to make sure everything's maintained. The maintenance is much more critical than anything else. And obviously in the fall, you can do kind of a little harvest supper. We would harvest our tomatoes and our peppers and do a little spaghetti supper fundraiser. So just another little idea to raise some money. And then we would have like a kind of a school-wide celebration. One of the things my kids did, this was first graders, but we did a whole Earth Day program where we incorporated our schoolyard project. And this just shows we ate all the parts of a plant. Lettuce with the leaves, obviously the fruit, we had celery for the stem, we had carrots for the root vegetable, we had sunflower seeds, I don't know if you could see them, but we did, so the kids actually built their own salad based on things that we grew in our garden, which was pretty cool. Another thing that we incorporated, I wish I had a little bit better picture. This was one of my last classes. We had a local artist named Gail Castle. She gave me permission to use this. She is a mural artist, and she did this incredible mural in our schoolyard garden that incorporated all the animals around the Chesapeake Bay area and the plants in the Chesapeake Bay area. So it was just a way to show that, you know, your school gardens can obviously benefit your environment too. Everything leads to the bay, as we say in Maryland. So anything I need to address with anybody right now before I go on?
We did have a question. Who made the butterfly walkway tiles a few slides back?
Who made them? A couple slides. That was an art project. This is not, I will caveat here, this is not my particular one, but we did a project similar. I just couldn't find the picture. So I found one. This was done in the art class. And they made them, the art teacher actually made the molds. And now, not this particular one, but my stepping stones that we did. And every classroom actually did a stepping stone for our gardens that were around our school. As I said, we did have a large garden project that was adjacent to our school. We could walk to it. It's about a 10-minute walk. But I know a lot of people, like, they paint rocks and things and put them around in the gardens, and that's all well and good. But this was kind of we did a walkway around our school. And this was an art project. This was something the art teacher, and even back to the mural, the artist, when she did this, she blocked it out. So every child in the school got to paint something on that mural. Limited. But, just a way to get your kids involved in every aspect of your garden. This was our courtyard garden, so it was within our school. So it had two soil areas on either side of it. And we did raised beds in one, and then we used the regular soil in the other. And the one side was very, very shady. So we had to choose plants accordingly for that. And the other side is where we did our monarch garden. This was not our project. This was an adjacent school. But again, just seeing some of the materials you could use. You can mix those raised beds in. Those were bamboo poles from somebody's home. They're very easy to find, and they're free. As much as you can find for free, I always say. This was the milk jug I was talking about. The kids decorated them. Everybody drinks milk, everybody drinks some kind of, maybe iced teas or something. We just have the kids save them, bring them in, rinse them out, cut them up, and that was our little container garden. So don't feel intimidated if you think, God, I really don't think we have a good space at my school. You can find little nooks and crannies anywhere to grow things. So this was just another idea, way to keep your garden gloves, because they usually do get dirty. I would always try and kind of hose them down and then leave them up to dry. So the next teacher wasn't dealing with a bunch of dirty, icky gloves. This was not my idea. This was one I found, which I thought was really cute. They kind of just I love that kids can see the whole growing process, especially with our fruit vegetables. Some of you may have had these in your classrooms before. They do sell these kits. But again, this is something that if you have a parent volunteer or somebody that, maybe isn't into the gardening part, but likes to build things, this is where you get your volunteers to come in and just utilize their skills. I can't emphasize that enough, that you really reach out to your parents in your school first and foremost, and then the community at large. There's people that love to get involved in these kind of programs, and they all have their own expertise to add to it. This was kind of us near the end. We had our little celebration. That's me in the background with my students. Those two men there were just retired individuals. One guy was the soil scientist for the state of Maryland. I'm telling you, things just kind of fell into my lap sometimes. And one of the projects we did down the line was we dug a 48-inch soil pit. So the kids, that was a whole other area of the curriculum, that they could study the history of the soil. And what was cool is my school was near the Naval Academy. So we had Naval Academy recruits come up, and they actually dug the soil pit for us. So you never know where you're going to find a resource. You just gotta kind of keep your eyes and ears open. And the more people you talk to about your project, believe me, the ideas come out of the woodwork. People that have had their own gardens, or they've been excited about something that worked in their garden. So that's my big push for, getting your resources and your volunteers. The last thing I wanted to touch, was the benefits. I think if you're on this workshop, you probably know that benefits are incredible. But sometimes when you have to present to your staff or to your administrators, you want to make sure they know that this isn't just about gardening. The gardening is the basic part of it. Our motto was get dirty and eat fresh. And we would tell the kids, this is your food doesn't come from the supermarket. Your food comes from a farm or from a garden. And we want them to have that understanding really from an early age, and that you can grow your own. But we want to respect what our farmers are doing every day too. So the gardening is certainly the basic part of this, but it's hands-on. I mean, I was always a huge hands-on teacher. You can involve kids so much more. And those kids that maybe don't feel comfortable in a classroom setting, and we all know them, they flourish in these kinds of activities. I had a kid when we did a hydroponic program years ago. He was not interested at all. He ended up designing the LED light system that was used in the warehouse where we had this program. So you can really bring kids in a lot of different areas. You know, math, there's lots of ideas for math, from shapes to measuring to data collection to graphing. And I could go on and on. I'm sure you know a lot of them too. I do have some sample lessons on the resource page. But again, you kind of have to look at your own curriculum. We do follow the standards of the United States. That's the national standards, and most states kind of go down and have their different mandates. But look at your own curriculum and just be able to see that this isn't just about science. You know, we're just not learning about parts of a plant or parts of a flower. We're learning about math and history, you know, what about the history of plants and the history of gardening. You can talk about different people. We read biographies. Our older kids read biographies about famous gardeners and different people that were involved in the environment. So you can stretch it out that way. Definitely, and I could prove this by showing you data scores, but you can see it in your own schools. It absolutely improves achievement for kids. There's a direct correlation between not just the hands-on activities, but actually working where they see something that they've started and they see an end result from it. So achievement scores will be increased. We're talking about health and nutrition, which are huge issues in our country right now. And we want kids to understand, you know, what a healthy diet looks like, what nutrition really is, planning their own meals, planning what a healthy meal is. So that goes into your PE health teachers, you know, mode that they can talk about. There's absolutely an improvement in social skills and empathy and kindness to your neighbors, working with community partners. We had kids that had to present this to community groups. So there was the public speaking aspect. I mean, as I said, I could probably stay here for hours talking about all the different connections you could make. But I trust that you can also do that too, but I'm just giving you some of the ideas that came up over the years with us. It definitely instills an appreciation for nature and wildlife, because you can incorporate wildlife habitats into your garden. We definitely wanted the pollinators, you know, so we had pollinators in our garden. Then we built the apiary. So we had a 6-hive apiary, which definitely benefited our garden. We built blue jay boxes. We built a bog. So we had all these projects were just kind of as the project went on over the years. That was probably over about a 7-year span, where we went from just starting with a monarch garden all the way up to having the high tunnel and bog. Composting was another area. We had 4 composting areas, and we had different kinds of composting. So that's a whole area. Really, our middle schoolers and high schoolers got really into that and designing, you know, the best kind of compost and what to put in it and what you had available. We did use our school lunch program a little bit. There's unfortunately not a whole lot in a school lunch program that can be composting, but there were some things. So we talked to the kids. We were a green school, so we had to separate everything. So that made it easier. And then we had an actual class every week, and their responsibility was to collect the things for the compost bin and go out and stir it up and use that soil later. So that was a whole other project. Again, talking about, you know, responsibility to your community, responsibility to your neighbors. If food poverty is an issue in your area, that could be a project that your kids do. We had an Eagle Scout join us at one point because he was working on, he's the one that built our apiary for us, actually a former student of mine. So I was really excited to see him. He was a senior in high school when he built it, and it was very kind of nice just to see that continuation. And again, you know, one of the big catchwords in schools nowadays is empathy, teaching children to be empathetic towards others and seeing what others' needs are and working with others and working in those partnerships. You get to see kids work together that maybe normally would not work together in the classroom, or they would choose to work with each other. So you can kind of see those connections there. But those are kind of some of the arguments, if you need them, to go to your administrator with. Like, it isn't just about gardening. There's so many other facets to having a schoolyard project like this, and you can incorporate every area. of the curriculum in it, and just have fun. As we said, get dirty, eat fresh, and have fun.
We
So
do,
maybe
we do have a couple questions. When you grow indoors, do you need to have plants near windows, or is fluorescent or incandescent lights okay?
I've done it both ways. Somebody donated. It wasn't a huge thing. It was probably maybe 2 feet by 3 feet. Somebody had donated it to us because I always use windows. Most classrooms do have windows, but I actually did teach in a basement classroom for a couple of years, so I get that there's those classrooms too. So yeah, the grow lights worked fine. We really didn't see a huge difference between plants that were grown, just relying on regular sunlight coming through the windows. But we even started some of them like in Ziploc bags taped up to the windows, so the kids could see the root systems growing, and then, transplanted them. But again, to answer your question, in my experience, we didn't see any huge difference between those two types of artificial sun versus sunlight. But that's even a cool science experiment. I'm big on science fair too, so there was a lot of opportunities for kids to have science fair projects through our school garden project.
Very cool. We also have a couple comments. One person says, check with your county extension office. They might have some soil test kits for you.
Absolutely. Good point.
And your local farm bureau may have grants as well. Someone got $250 grants through the Florida Farm Bureau for
Excellent.
a preschool
Yes.
garden.
Yeah, I will tell you, as I'll talk again about, don't be intimidated by grant writing. People often think, oh, it's just hard. And I know it's extra work. I agree with that. But a lot of these are one page. They basically want to know the data from your school, what kind of population you're dealing with. If you are in a school that has high poverty rates, sometimes you could reach out to some of programs that you maybe normally wouldn't associate with a school garden. Some of your local community organizations, they might have some funding, things like Rotary clubs, Kiwanis clubs. Like, you really just kind of have to keep your mind open to any kind of resource, because I always joke about my very first grant was actually called a seed grant. But it didn't have it. I used it for seeds, but it was the Susquehanna Environmental Education Development Property. It just happened to be seed. So I always joke about, when you plant that first seed, it just keeps growing, because that was $1,000 grant, but it was enough for me to buy plants that year. As I said, I was able to get the greenhouses built through volunteer laborers. But that seed grant was the very first thing that I used to get our gardens growing. And I admit it, I was very naive going into this 30 years ago, still am, still learning. But I think the biggest thing I did learn is that keep your eyes and ears open, and make sure you reach out to anybody in the community. Don't think it has to have the word garden attached to it. It doesn't. A lot of these local organizations are just looking for ways to enhance curriculum in schools. And obviously, I think you can find a number of examples of how curriculum is advanced or enhanced.
We have one more comment that the Pennsylvania Department of Conservation has $3,000 grants and larger ones for regional programs as well.
DCNR?
Yes.
I would think they're talking about DCNR. Yes, absolutely, another resource. I do have some of these resources listed on the resource page, which I think you'll be able to access tomorrow. The video should be on that too, as well as the PowerPoint. Again, these are a lot of my own personal pictures. If you want to find other images, you can go online, make sure it says free images. But these kids have already had, permission and that kind of thing. So I used my own just to show you some examples of things we had done. And it's just a matter of really planning. I wouldn't advise to just dive into this and think it's going to all happen at once. It's really important after you get your administration approval and you feel like you have your staff again, you're never going to get 100%. I'm not going to be negative about that, but I think if you make it known that everybody's going to have a role, everybody's going to have a different job, it's not overwhelming. We know teachers have a lot on their plate, especially now, but some of the schools that I've been teaching in this year, that's one thing that I've been pleased to see, that their schoolyard garden projects have been ongoing. Even though they've kind of been in and out of school, they've still used it as that opportunity just to get the kids outside, number one, and just to incorporate it into their curriculum. It's, I'll tell you, I've taught thousands of kids through schoolyard projects, and I to this day, I've never had one that didn't enjoy it and didn't get something out of it. Some kids get a lot out of it, but even if you get that one kid that, you know, this might be their ticket to, you know, being a better reader, being a better math student, if they have something meaningful. We did poetry. I had kids write songs. There was just, it just keeps growing. Hate to use the pun again, but it does. It's the more you get into this program, you're going to just see that it does keep growing, and people, when they see something kind of successful going, they're more willing to join in.
Wonderful. Well, with that, thank you so much, Diane, for sharing your experience and resources. Everyone who's attending, her resource sheet is awesome. You'll be very excited with everything. So if you could all take the post test that is in the chat box, that would be wonderful. And maybe we will see you tomorrow for maple sugaring.
What are questions? Letitia Colley, do you see that or no?
Yes. Letitia, do you have something to say? I think we're okay.
Okay. All right. Well, I hope you enjoyed this. This was my first time presenting this, so I think I learned some things too. So I hope you learned a few things, and get out there and grow. This is my favorite thing. This is what I'm doing kind of in my retirement years, and that's why I'm working with the Farm Bureau. So I really enjoy these kinds of activities with kids, and I can't even tell you how beneficial this is to everybody. They really, teachers included. This is a good way for teachers to get out there and get their hands dirty too, and really do some hands-on activities with their kids. So I hope you get out there and grow.